Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Dave's podcast. This season, we're looking at the book Deathworlds to Lifeworlds, Collaboration with Strangers for Personal, Social, and Ecological Transformation. Today, I have with me Dr. Lorraine Crockford. She is a California licensed psychotherapist. Her practice focuses on trauma and anxiety and addictive disorders. As a researcher, her work focuses on multiple realities theorized by Alfred Schutz, using concepts to deepen the understanding of human experience, especially as an intersubjective relation between self and family, self and work, and self and social systems. Please welcome to the podcast, Dr. Lorraine Crockford. So here we go. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to make this podcast with me, Lorraine. Your chapter contribution to the book Deathworlds to Lifeworlds is about research you conducted with 6 first responders. What led you to prepare a piece on such a dynamic and dramatic topic?
Well, it's been something I've been working on for quite a few years, this topic. And I would say in around 2017, with the fires in Northern California, I began receiving calls from first responders. I had also been looking for another way to study this phenomena. Besides just a clinical lens, in the way first responders experience trauma incident. And in my studies at Fielding, Dr. Valerie Benz introduced me to the Lifeworld and Alfred Schutz and his multiple realities and typifications and meaning and purpose. And so I endeavored to navigate the phenomena of trauma experience with first responders through Schutz's ontology.
And ontology would be
his theoretical lens of the life world that he had scaffolded, which is actually quite complex. So it's sort of like building the plane as you're flying it to understand everything. It will take me the rest of my life to read everything, I believe. So, but one of the things that drew me to Schutz was that he noted being accepted or tolerated, being accepted to a group or tolerated, and in crisis. And Schutz was, he did live through war. He participated, he also immigrated. So he had all these experiences and himself in studying what it meant to be a stranger. And he has a beautiful paper, The Stranger. It's an essay that he has written in how a cultural group through its typifications orients itself, or how one orients themselves within a group. And everything there, you're in the middle and your orbit is around you. So I began to explore the life world of responders in this way.
So your exploration of first responders wasn't just about the crises that they throw themselves into, but it was also about the nature of being in a group. Is that what you're saying?
I would say so, yes, and being in a large organization, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's explore this question of a stranger, being a stranger. You looked at this question of how it's possible for a first responder to become a stranger to himself or herself. So what does this mean, to become a stranger to oneself?
Well, I would not say how Schutz may have intended this. However, he himself, as I said, processed war in his lifetime and encountered differing cultures and patterns. I will say first responders, high rates of completed suicides, which are 10 times that of the general public. It's an ultimate and final disconnect from the self. You know, one of my participants called it a cry for help. Completed suicide is a cry for help. So there are underlying issues that came up, themes that came up in my study about self-blame, culpability, taking responsibility for things that are beyond your control. And so you self-doubt along with then emotional repression to try to manage the remembering of a traumatic incident and pushing it down. And so while you're pushing that out and down, that emotion, you limit yourself in emoting. And so that's what I mean by splitting off a part of the self. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned blame, that first responders may blame themselves, feel guilty, culpable in their work. In your work with them as a therapist, have you been able to walk them down a path of forgiving themselves?
I'm not so sure it's forgiveness. I think it's coming just to understand understanding the powerlessness, but nobody wants to be powerless when you're running into trauma. So it's like this double-edged sword, but also under getting a grip of what occurred to you. Many people are not trained going in to this type of work, and it comes upon them. And they often feel like they can't get a grip on themselves, or they must be going crazy, or why is time slowing down? So there's some neurological aspects to that too.
So the experience of feeling helpless leads immediately into feeling guilty for being helpless.
Or being culpable. Yeah, culpable. So I don't know if I would say guilty, but a feeling of it's wrong. I need to tough it out. I need to push that down. And there's a secondary reason for pushing those things out too. It's not to remember it, because we have a neurological survival function that will just go on and on without that being interrupted. So that's coming to the forefront. I see, people putting podcasts out about that, and that's fantastic, because once you have that information, you can know that when time has slowed down, that it's supposed to, that there's not something wrong with you.
Right. Now, earlier on, you mentioned that first responders have 10 times the suicide rate of the normal average population. Do you think that people know this?
I don't think so. I don't think the general public know this, because here's the thing. We write scholarly, we present papers, we do research. And one of the things that I was hoping in my research, and especially being a practitioner, that I could get that information out to the people actually experiencing it. I think that hopefully it's getting better, but it depends where you are. If we're talking about the United States, it depends if you have access to that knowledge, right? So.
First responders practice the impossible to bring life-sustaining aid when saving someone is sometimes simply out of reach, regardless of the training someone receives, the equipment provided, and how well a rescue is executed. Yet too often they blame themselves for their apparent failure, which we've been talking about. How can they avoid acquiring a profound learned helplessness that follows such a sequence of hopeless, unthinkable events?
Well, if I think about the study, there was a percentage that was revealed in the study. There were several participants that knew about trauma before they had become first responders from complex developmental trauma of childhood. And then there were those in the study that had come to the job as a service, one after 9/11, and then another one who, been in the Marines, or this is how I can help others. So it's being of service to one's community. So I think that it depends on who you are as a person and what has happened to you in your lifetime that influences a degree of helplessness. So there are those that know the helplessness, and then there are those that that come to it by the nature of the trauma that they're in.
Now, to be a first responder requires significant training. There's no question about that. What do you think the chances are that we can build in some preventive measures, psychological preventive measures, as protection against the coming trauma? We know it's coming. Is that, I don't know, is it being built in right now to existing curricula?
I think it depends on where you are in the United States. I know of a police officer who teaches his up and coming, so he shifted into more of a teacher and educator for those going out into the field for the first time. I think it's important, there are other authors that have been police officers. There are police officers that are now becoming psychologists or are psychologists. And so I think the information is being given out. But a lot of it is after the fact. So it depends on where you are and how you're being trained. It depends on your chief. There's no, or same thing for firefighters. I don't think there's I think it's dependent from state to state, and it also depends on money for training.
Sure. It's just not built in yet uniformly as a standard across the board.
Right, but I think acquiring knowledge, both cognitively and somatically, and reaching out. There are organizations such as the First Responder Support Network that's amazing. It's all people that have been there, and they're either still involved in first responding or they are retired. And it's a 7-day retreat. There's one in California. I think they're trying to branch out to other states. People do come from all over the world to learn about it. It's amazing. I just don't know if it's enough. And the wait list to get in there for a 7-day retreat, there's a wait list. So
I see. You mentioned the word splitting earlier. I'm just thinking about on the way to becoming a stranger to oneself, you described the creation of a private inner death world of splitting, where one neglects to address unhealed trauma. Now, how does trauma shut off one's ability to think and emotionally process experience?
Well, I think here I just have to speak to the neurological survival of all of us. We are a species, even though we forget that. The temporal lobes will go offline to protect the brain in an incident. And there's something called the medulla, which is 2 almond shapes behind your eyes and between your ears that fire like Chicken Little in the brain. And then there is a chamber over here that releases cortisol into the body. So you can either fight or flight or freeze and submit. And people will do both, or they will, oh yeah, I'm a fight flight, or I'm a free submit. So this is when the temporal lobes go off, time slows down. It's like being in slow motion. It's a different way to temporarily, experience time. And so if you use your chemicals, all the chemicals, and there's more chemicals being released by the brain, more just than cortisol, you can use it. You've seen those people that pick up a truck and people go, wow, how did that happen? And if you don't use these, you can become very exhausted. So the science and the brain science over the past 10, 20 years is remarkable. Your art neuroscientists have given us so much wonderful information. So this needs to come down and be translated. And when it's translated, it's helpful because you can be in a traumatic event, actually watching yourself and knowing it's okay rather than being shocked by it.
Would you say that at some level, the release of neurotransmitters and neurochemicals in the brain because of traumatic events can become addictive?
Well, that would be a couple of adrenaline, and so, yeah, who doesn't like adrenaline? I myself jumped out of a plane by 14,000 feet, and it was pure adrenaline, and it was like, wow, I had no idea. That was great. So there are people that go back and do that every weekend just to get that feeling. But anyway, so it really depends on if you brought up the word addiction, and that's another way of repressing and numbing the self. And a lot of people will go towards substances to quell, and it's another way of splitting off, since we're talking about splitting off the self, either in alcoholism, smoking marijuana, other substances, or we can be addicted to anything in this country, honestly.
Well, that's the thing. I wasn't referring so much to external substances as becoming addicted to the brain being conditioned by neurotransmitters released in unusually high doses on a regular basis.
I think that there are people that are, habituated or conditioned to that. I think people that have been through trauma early in life. And I think we see it in our ER doctors and our nurses who are taking a WAPO hit right now. Unfortunately, but yeah. But I think there are some people have more oxytocin levels where they care for humanity and each other, and or they come from families that make a dedicated, way of being with other people and care.
So you're anticipating my next question then, because now I'd like to transition from the neurological to the psychological. You point a way out of this predicament, and it is through intersubjectivity, meaning, as you just said, the first responder's relationship to one's colleagues, family members, friends, and support professionals. So what kind of skill and what level of courage does it require for a first responder to adequately address firsthand trauma and its lingering effects?
Well, I think interconnection, intersubjective is connection to others. Unfortunately, many people are going to isolate because of shame or doubt, or being completely overwhelmed, or not being able to relate to the small things, day-to-day things in life, or with their families. So it's usually the families that notice first. A spouse, a partner, children will notice. And there is a secondary, trauma component. So sometimes people, what I found in the study, will just cut themselves off until a wife or somebody said, that's it, we need to go and talk to somebody and get some help. The connections that are really working, I think, are definitely being connected to fellow first responders that have been there, and for them that they have found a way out. And I think what they want everyone to know is it can get better. That's what they say. It can get better.
Right. Now, a great deal of the trauma felt by first responders, you report, is a physical bodily experience. How did your participants balance the bodily or somatic experience with their emotional and mental faculties?
A lot of times they didn't. Some of the participants, two of them specifically, had dreams where they would wake out of something nightmarish and jump out of bed and think that they had the flu or, something was wrong, because trauma does sit in the body, traumatic stress. And, another responder talked about she would wake up saying, why am I thinking about this right now? Not having been able to save somebody.
Is dreaming a coping device?
I think, being in practice, when people start dreaming, I feel like it's a positive thing, but not if it's a night terror.
Right. So I'm wondering, how can such immediate physical death worlds be turned again into life worlds?
Well, I think the hope in that is getting information out on a practical level and a change in systems, because often it's the organizations won't recognize the trauma. So it's another splitting. You're either with us or you're out, kind of a thing. But not all. I mean, the people that I had, the participants were amazing people. They were so dedicated they would give their lives for us, truly. That's a phenomena that it still boggles my mind. Like, wow, thank you.
Right. And along the lines of feeling split internally or splitting from your social world, one of your participants, Jill, experienced a queer sense of distancing from her own crew for the simple act of emptying a good pot of coffee and making a fresh one.
Well, I think, I'm sorry.
The question is, how can such a simple, innocent act, followed by the revelation of it spoken aloud by one of her team, how can that result in her feeling disconnected to her core?
Well, it was symbolic of a microaggression towards her. And that can happen in somebody in a group. Your typifications are in your group that you don't speak up against the captain or go over the captain's head, even if the captain did something miserable. So the reason, it can be chilling when you are going into life and death situations with your crew. They stare at you and watch you make a pot of coffee while they knew that they had already made it, but they're not going to intervene. So what was chilling to her was, how can you intervene? How would they intervene in a life-death situation when she's out there? How can she rely on her crew? And that became haunting, because it would cost her injury or death. Possibly.
So in other words, if they're not going to intervene in something as trivial as making a cup of coffee, what are the chances they would intervene when it's a matter of saving someone's life?
Right. And she was the only female crew member at that time.
Okay. Well, Lorraine, thank you for joining me and sharing your expertise with us all. And this is a very important piece of work you've put out there. And I hope this podcast gets viewed by many. Is there anything I missed that you feel would help round out our discussion?
I I don't think so. I just want to say that everyone deserves a chance. And I hope that any responder that gets to listen to this knows that they deserve that. They deserve healing. So
That's a good note to end on. Thanks again.